In a forgotten part of the world, hidden beneath canopies of silver-leaved trees and wrapped in the hush of endless twilight, stands a mysterious observatory, one not built by humans, but grown by the forest itself. No roads lead to it, no maps mark its place. Yet when you dream deeply enough, you might find yourself there. Elara, a quiet and curious sleep scientist, stumbles upon this strange sanctuary while chasing a strange frequency that appears only at dusk. Drawn by echoes of a forgotten star system and whispers from a comet that doesn't follow any known orbit, she discovers something extraordinary, a living telescope that sees not just across galaxies, but into memories, feelings, and dreams. But this observatory isn't just a machine, it remembers. It has stories stored not in data, but in emotion. It invites Elara to listen. And when she does, she begins to uncover messages not from aliens or far-off planets, but from the dreams of humanity itself. What do we dream of when we sleep under the stars? What might the stars be dreaming of in return? Come close, and let us begin a soft journey through space, sleep, and the science of wonder. The signal beneath the ice. Far beyond Neptune's quiet orbit, past the last flickers of sunlight and the familiar dance of known moons, there floated a forgotten planet, unnamed on any modern star chart, unnoticed by even the most powerful observatories. It was cold. So cold, in fact, that its surface had frozen into deep, glassy layers of ancient ice. No bird sang there. No wind blew. It simply waited. But beneath its shimmering crust, deep in the heart of the frozen rock, there pulsed something faint. Something slow and quiet. Like the heartbeat of a creature dreaming in sleep so long and still, the universe itself had nearly forgotten. Meanwhile, back on Earth, in a quiet observatory nestled high above the Arctic snow, a sleepy scientist named Dr. Mira Solon was sipping tea beside a humming array of listening dishes. Mira was different from the other researchers. While others sought noise, bursts of radio waves, signals of chaos and life, Mira listened for silence. For patterns hidden in the quiet. Her work wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. And she liked it that way. On a soft, snowy evening, she noticed something strange on the data stream. A long, slow pulse. So faint it barely registered. Not random. Not noise. A rhythm. As the auroras danced outside her window, Mira leaned closer. She knew, in the way scientists sometimes do, with a mix of logic and quiet instinct, that this wasn't just a glitch. Somewhere far away, something was whispering. And it had been whispering for a very, very long time. The observatory that listened to silence. Dr. Mira Solon had always felt more at home in the quiet of the observatory than in the noise of cities or conversations. Her colleagues called her the sleep scientist, not just because of her gentle voice or the calm, steady rhythm of her days, but because she studied the universe the way one studies dreams, slowly, patiently, and always with a sense of wonder. The North Auroral Listening Station, where Mira worked, sat perched on a glacial cliff, a silver dome wrapped in snow, facing the black velvet sky like a sleeping eye. It was built to detect deep space anomalies, flickers of X-rays, low-frequency radio waves, even gravitational echoes. But for Mira, it was a sanctuary. Each night, as most of the world turned away to rest, she would begin her work. Wrapped in her thick sweater, the sleeves always slightly too long, she would brew her peppermint tea and light a small amber lamp beside her workstation. She rarely turned on the bright overheads, she preferred the glow of screens and stars. And every night, she listened. She listened not for explosions or chaos, but for absence, for the gentle hush between stars. It was this silence that fascinated her. To Mira, the cosmos wasn't just a vast emptiness, it was a sleeping mind, and she wanted to hear its dreams. That's why, when the first strange pulse appeared on her monitor, she noticed immediately. At first, it looked like nothing. A soft curve on the wave graph. Faint and deep, like the rhythm of something buried under oceans of time. She leaned in. Her brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in the way an artist studies brushstrokes. It was repeating. A pattern. Not random. Every 2 hours and 17 minutes, a long, low-frequency signal echoed through space. Too low for ordinary detection. But Myra's instruments were tuned to listen where most didn't. They were made for the cold, quiet corners of the universe. She marked the time. Waited. And again, it came, gentle as a breath through ice. Myra whispered to herself, "You're trying to be heard." She ran the signal through every known catalog. Pulsars, magnetars, interstellar interference. Nothing matched. It wasn't technological either, not in the usual sense. There was no artificial compression, no signs of data packets. But there was structure. Purpose. She sat back in her chair, the aurora spilling green and violet ribbons across the observatory ceiling through the dome's skylight. And she wondered, what kind of planet sends a signal without knowing how? What kind of place dreams loud enough to reach across galaxies? Far across the void, deep beneath the frozen crust of that forgotten world, something ancient and dormant stirred. Not alive in the way we know it, but aware, somehow. Like a lantern buried in snow, flickering. Hoping. It hadn't always been alone. Long ago, long before Earth had even cooled, this planet had basked in a sun of its own, orbited by moons, warmed by clouds of golden gas and strange, floating flora. It had once glowed. But its star had died. Its sky had gone dark. And still, something within remembered. It remembered light. And that memory pulsed through the ice, carried on frequencies it did not understand, reaching out in the only way it could, slow, soft, steady. Back on Earth, Myra watched the signal scroll across her screen again. She closed her eyes. "I hear you," she whispered. And somewhere in the darkness, the forgotten planet dreamed a little brighter. The planet with a memory. The days that followed were slow and quiet, like snow falling over a sleeping town. But inside Myra's mind, something had awakened. The strange signal wasn't just a mystery to solve, it felt like a presence. Like a whisper drifting through the void, searching for someone who might understand. She kept listening. She began logging each pulse with the same reverence a poet might give falling leaves. Each wave, each curve, each flicker of data was carefully archived, printed onto long spools of star chart paper that she pinned gently along the walls of her observatory dome. And then one evening, exactly 7 days after the first detection, the pattern changed. Not the frequency. Not the pitch. But the spacing. The signal had learned. Instead of every 2 hours and 17 minutes, the pulse arrived 2 minutes earlier. Then the next day, 4 minutes earlier. It was as if the planet, or whatever was beneath its icy surface, had noticed it was being heard, and was now leaning closer. Myra felt it deep in her chest, not fear, but awe. She brewed her peppermint tea, placed her gloved hands on the smooth sides of her ceramic cup, and stared up at the stars beyond the skylight. "You're trying to speak to me, aren't you?" she murmured. And somehow, she felt the answer. Half a galaxy away, buried in crystalline caverns beneath the surface of the forgotten world, a slow memory stirred. Not of voices. Not of language. But of light. In the ancient past, before the star had gone cold, the planet had been a world of illumination. Its sky was filled with floating auroras. Its surface bloomed with bioluminescent forests that shimmered with hues unknown to human eyes. And beneath its crust were great crystalline cores, natural memory banks, able to absorb energy and echo it back in song. Those cores were still there. Still singing. Still remembering the warmth of sunlight. Even as everything above had frozen, those ancient lattices had held on. Not alive, not in the way people are. But dreaming. Remembering. Longing. And now, something had changed. Something someone, had heard them. Back at the observatory, Mira made a decision. She switched the station to transmission mode. No one else would have thought to do it. Not yet. The data was inconclusive, and the risk of noise interference was high. But Mira didn't care. This wasn't about hard certainty. It was about intuition. About hope. She prepared a soft pulse, just a vibration at the edge of human hearing. A tone built of Fibonacci ratios, golden spirals, and wave harmonics, patterns found everywhere in nature. A kind of cosmic lullaby. She sent it once. Then again. Then she waited. The room was silent, save for the soft ticking of the old observatory clock and the occasional hum of the wind brushing against the dome. And then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the signal returned. But this time, it changed shape. The curve had softened. Split slightly. It mirrored the shape Mira had sent. It was trying to match her voice. Myra's heart fluttered, like a leaf caught in a gentle breeze. "You're listening to me too," she whispered. "You remember light." And in that moment, across the impossible distances of space, two lonely minds, one human, one unknown, sat quietly in each other's company. Neither knew what the other truly was. But both understood the longing. The language of silence. Mira sat wrapped in a thick gray blanket, her tea forgotten and growing cold beside her. She had read and reread the signal so many times, it was now etched in her mind like a constellation. But tonight, something felt different. Not just the pattern. The feeling. It was like listening to a song in a language you didn't know, but somehow still understanding its sorrow. The pulse wasn't random. It wasn't just light. It was a message. Not words. Not instructions. Something older. A memory, maybe. A feeling recorded in light. She scribbled lines into her journal. Shapes. Sound waves. Notes in the margins like. Tone softened here. New echo detected. Could this be mimicry? Or trust? And just as her eyelids began to grow heavy, the screen flickered again. The signal pulsed, not just earlier than expected, but with two distinct waves. One was the same soft curve she'd sent the night before. But the second had a new echo beneath it. A harmonic, like a second voice humming softly in the background. It wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. Something beneath the planet's surface had evolved its reply. Meanwhile, on the frozen planet, deep beneath glittering caves that shimmered with ancient energy, a shift occurred. The crystalline memory banks, those strange, dormant structures once filled with warmth and data, had begun to awaken in sequence. For centuries, they had held only silence. But the signal from Mira had reached them. Not as a command, but as companionship. Like a stone dropped into a still lake, her gentle voice had rippled through the caverns. The crystal cores responded not with speech, but with vibration. With frequency. With echoes that traveled like ghostly lullabies. And the planet dreamed. It dreamed of golden days. Of skies filled with solar winds. Of warmth soaking into rock. Of light flickering through forests made of glass. But most of all, it dreamed of connection. Mira didn't sleep that night. She stayed curled in her chair, eyes fixed on the spectral display of the signal, heart thudding softly under her sweater. She began to hum quietly. Just a simple note, matching the harmonic she'd seen. It was silly, she thought. Singing to a planet. Whispering to a memory. But as she hummed, the frequency on her screen shifted, ever so slightly. The signal reacted. It wasn't just sending now. It was listening. And Mira smiled. "You don't want to be alone either, do you?" she whispered. Then, using the observatory's transmitter, she sent another message, this time, made not of data, but of melody. A song built from planetary frequencies, gentle mathematical rhythms, and ancient musical ratios. She let it play through the vacuum of space. And far away, under layers of ice and forgotten time, the planet listened. Echoes beneath ice. From The Sleep Scientist, the Forgotten Planet That Dreamed of Light. Mira sat alone in the pale glow of the observatory's control room, her fingers curled gently around a warm cup of tea. Outside the dome, the stars blinked like distant signals, too far to reach but close enough to hear, if one knew how to listen. The signal was still coming. Steady. Whispering. Patient. A pattern was forming, too regular for chance. It pulsed like breath, one long tone, pause, two short bursts, then silence again. It had been days since Mira first received the strange frequency from the frozen exoplanet buried in the data logs of a now-defunct satellite. A planet with no name, marked only by a string of cold alphanumeric symbols, orbiting a dying sun far beyond the spiral arms of the galaxy. She'd named it Lumen. Lumen had no atmosphere, no magnetic field, and no evidence of life. Yet the signal persisted. It didn't carry information in the usual sense, no code, no language, no digital packaging. It was older than any transmission Mira had ever studied. It hummed like a dream lost in time. She adjusted the sensitivity of the deep-range receiver, filtering out cosmic background noise and distant quasars. Her computer translated the waveform into a visual map, tiny ripples like the surface of a pond. But what intrigued her most were the harmonics buried deep within the primary signal, subsonic vibrations that mirrored seismic patterns. "Is it coming from beneath the surface?" she whispered. Could Lumen have once had an ocean beneath its ice? Could something still be moving beneath those layers, some ancient mechanism? A natural resonance from tectonic plates frozen in slow motion? Or something else entirely? Mira stood up and walked slowly to the projection dome, activating the holographic planetary model. Lumen emerged from the darkness, a sphere of jagged white, cracked with ridges like deep scars. Its poles glittered faintly. Not from light, but from reflection, like glass catching starlight. She remembered old Earth legends about spirits in the ice, about voices heard in the quietest snows. Lumen reminded her of those stories, lonely. Shrouded in silence, dreaming of warmth it had never known. A file blinked on her console, her AI assistant had decoded a pattern in the signal's repetition. Not words, but numbers. Prime numbers. Sequential, climbing, patient. Almost as if the planet, or something inside it, was counting. Not for attention. Not for rescue. But simply to be known. It chilled her, not from fear, but from awe. The kind of awe that turns silence into sacred space. She wrapped her blanket tighter and typed slowly into her journal. Lumen may not be dead. It may be dreaming. Or remembering. And the signal, it might not be calling for us. It might be echoing through the stars just to say, "I was here." The clock ticked softly into the night, and Mira kept listening. And far away, in a corner of space untouched for eons, the signal continued its lonely pulse. A message from ice and time. A whisper from the deep. The pale language of light. The next evening, the observatory was unusually quiet. Even the hum of the electronics seemed to soften, as if the building itself was listening. Mira sat cross-legged on the floor beneath the towering central projection dome, a notebook resting gently in her lap. She'd been staring at the data from Lumen for hours, unblinking, unshaken, as if she feared the spell would break if she moved. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees lining the observatory's edge, and above the world, Lumen remained fixed in its lonely orbit, still sending that patient signal. But tonight, something was different. The pulses had changed. She rushed to the console and began decoding the latest waveforms. Her fingers danced across the keys, interpreting tones, filtering harmonics, and cross-referencing stellar timing models. There was now a flicker of fluctuation in the pulse delay, an intentional hesitation, like someone thinking before they speak. Then came a burst of radiant noise unlike any she'd recorded before. Not just sound. Not just vibration. Color. It began as a faint shimmer, electromagnetic pulses forming a delicate gradient of shifting hues. Soft reds, deep purples, and silver blues spilled from the visualization, sweeping across her screens like watercolor spilled into the night. Mira caught her breath. This wasn't random. The light wasn't chaotic. It was arranged. Repeating in sequences of Fibonacci spirals and golden ratios, the pulses pulsed in mirrored arcs, patterns known not just in mathematics, but in nature. The same spiral found in galaxies. In seashells. In the growing tips of ferns. It was the language of the universe. She reached out instinctively, as if to touch the glowing patterns in front of her. For a brief, unexplainable second, Mira felt a warmth pass through her fingertips, not from the monitors, but from something deeper, older, almost alive. The signal had matured. It was no longer counting. It was painting. Telling a story not with words, but with rhythm and form. With hue and symmetry. A planetary memory, played back through geometry. And in the midst of the kaleidoscope, Mira noticed something breathtaking. A shape. A spiral that began at the poles of Lumen, stretching inward like a great planetary breath. Not natural. Not tectonic. Something engineered. Something ancient. Could it be a structure? A transmission array built into the planet itself? Or could it be, the signal was the planet? She whispered softly. Lumen isn't just sending a message. Lumen is the message. Her voice trembled with a strange kind of reverence. Perhaps this world, frozen, forgotten, shivering in the void, had encoded its entire story into pulses of sound and light, unfolding like a slow dream across time. Maybe it wasn't reaching out to be saved. Maybe it was reaching out, to be remembered. And Mira, alone beneath the stars, had heard its voice. As the soft hues faded back into night, she lay down on the floor, notebook beside her heart, and let her breath rise and fall with the pulses of Lumen, slow, quiet, eternal. Dreams that echo in dust. The following night, the sky above the observatory was unusually clear, a dark, shimmering pool dotted with ancient starlight. Mira sat outside on the wooden bench beneath the telescope dome, her scarf tucked warmly around her neck, the air crisp and still. A mug of warm herbal tea steamed quietly in her hands. She watched the stars as she often did, not with urgency, but reverence. Each one flickered like a thought, far older than memory. Tonight, she wasn't just observing. She was listening. Lumen's pulses continued, soft and deliberate. But since the emergence of the spiral signal, Mira had begun dreaming differently. She saw dust-choked valleys and windswept plains. Towers made of shimmering crystal, overgrown with frost. She dreamt of beings, not quite human, not quite alien, but with eyes full of silence. Always silent. In her dreams, they stood in circles. Facing outward. Listening. As if they too had sent a signal long ago, and now waited patiently for someone like her to answer. Back inside the observatory, she lit a single candle and opened her dream journal. She wasn't sure if her notes were real visions or just the gentle driftings of a tired mind. But they felt guided. She began drawing. The spiral again, but this time surrounded by orbiting shards, almost like moons, but too ordered. Like pieces of a machine. Or a memory. On the page, she labeled them instinctively, lightkeepers. What if the planet had once been surrounded by orbiting stations, satellites meant to gather starlight, encode it, and beam it inward, feeding Lumen's core? Not to warm it. But to preserve something inside. A mind? A story? A soul? She paused, heart softly beating. If that was true, then somewhere beneath Lumen's icy crust, a slumbering consciousness waited, not quite alive, not quite lost. Like a planet dreaming itself back into being. Outside, a gentle wind picked up, rustling the grass and pine needles. And in the far distance, through the hum of the universe, came the faintest whisper in Myra's earpiece, not words, not data, but a note. A single tone, rising just above the pulse of Lumen's usual rhythm. A call. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she imagined drifting above that lonely world, tracing its spirals, feeling the static beneath its frozen crust, listening to the soft breathing of a planet that didn't want to die quietly. Lumen wasn't forgotten anymore. And it had begun to dream again. The memory garden. Mira had always believed that some places remember. That stone can hold sorrow. That water can echo laughter. That stars, despite their distance, carry the songs of ancient, forgotten dreams. And so she treated Lumen like a place with memory. A being, not a rock. A dreamer, not a relic. The next morning, she woke from a dream not her own. In it, she had walked barefoot across a plain of glowing frost beneath 3 suns. The sky had been violet, swirling with dust and particles that shimmered like crushed pearls. There had been towers made of light, not solid, not mechanical, more like music given shape. They bent in the wind like reeds. And there had been a garden. But no plants. Instead, it was filled with transparent spheres that hovered gently above the ground. She'd reached out to touch one, and inside, a memory bloomed. A child running through gravity fields. Laughter in an unfamiliar tongue. 2 figures waving from the edge of a crystal observatory. And always, that spiral, the same pattern Lumen beamed across the stars, traced into architecture, clothing, eyes. She awoke with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but awe. The feeling had been so pure, so intimate, it was like touching someone's soul while they slept. And now, she believed something deeply. Lumen was remembering. And it had chosen her to witness it. That afternoon, Mira connected the dream journal to her deep learning sketchpad. The AI inside had been trained not to correct, but to translate, to turn her hand-drawn spirals and dream symbols into possible reconstructions. The result took hours. When it finished, her screen showed a visual map of what it called memory nodes, spaced across Lumen's equator like the petals of a flower. At the center? A chamber labeled only with her input, cradle. She gasped softly. It wasn't a signal. It was a seed. And the spiral? It was a growth pattern, like a time capsule opening in measured intervals. Lumen had been quiet not because it was empty, but because it was patient. The scientists at the Mars relay station still hadn't noticed. To them, Lumen's pulse was just radio noise. But Mira knew better. She adjusted the telescope. Inputted new coordinates. And slowly, carefully, she aligned the relay dish with one of the memory nodes. Then she whispered into the silence. "I'm listening." And somewhere across that impossible distance, across the stretch of light years and time, something stirred. A light blinked back. The cradle below the ice. The signal was soft at first. Barely more than static wrapped in rhythm. But Mira recognized it, not through intellect, but through feeling. It was the same frequency from her dream. The same cadence that pulsed through the garden of memories, woven through the hovering orbs of that impossible place. Her instruments, however, were less poetic. The telemetry readouts showed only variations in photon decay, random to most eyes, but not to hers. To Mira, it was a language of longing. A murmur spoken by a planet trying to remember itself. She named it the Whisper Code. Over the following nights, Mira hardly slept. She mapped every blink of light, every glimmering echo that came from the node-marked cradle. And the more she mapped, the more she understood. Lumen's memory wasn't scattered. It was protected, hidden beneath its ice crust, sealed in an ancient vault older than Earth's oldest fossils. It was a womb of secrets. A memory held in stasis for countless millennia. But why? The dreams returned, more vivid each night. She stood beneath the alien sky again, now inside the cradle. The garden had grown. The spheres now played music. And not notes, but sounds of existence, a baby's first laugh, the sigh of an ocean, the ring of starlight bending through clouds. One sphere floated toward her and opened like a blooming flower. Inside, she saw herself. Not exactly, but a version of her, clad in a long robe of starlight, walking hand in hand with beings of light. They were scientists, too, but not of metal and wire. Their instruments were grown, not built. Their thoughts communicated in waves, not words. "Caretaker," the dream whispered. "You are the seed's shepherd." She woke with a start. And this time, the whisper wasn't from a dream. It was from the comms. A word. Just one, translated through her whisper code converter. "Welcome." Mira didn't move. Her heart beat in slow, quiet thumps. Outside her window, Lumen turned slowly in the black. Ice winds curled across its shadowy canyons. She whispered back. "I'm ready." And deep beneath the frost, in chambers untouched for 1,000,000 years, the cradle began to open. The voice beneath the ice. The signal grew clearer with each rotation of the planet. Where once there had been scattered pulses and phantom melodies, now there was form, structure, intent. Myra's converter worked tirelessly, humming with soft green light as it translated the celestial code into sound. And what it produced no longer resembled mere noise. It was a voice. Not a voice like a human's, no syllables, no language in the traditional sense. But it carried tone, warmth, and an unmistakable intelligence. It spoke in frequencies and harmonics, layered with such precision that Mira could feel the meanings bloom inside her chest rather than hear them in her ears. "You are not the first to listen," the planet seemed to say. "But you may be the first to remember." Mira sat curled in her observatory, lights dimmed, wrapped in the warmth of a silver blanket. Her gaze drifted from the translator to the great round window above, where stars floated like dreams waiting to be caught. Lumen, the silent planet below, spun slowly in the dark, veiled in white mist and memories. The cradle, the ancient vault beneath the ice, was changing. Sensors showed movement, impossible geometric shifts, reshaping internal chambers as if the structure were waking up after a long sleep. Temperature gradients whispered of warmth returning to ancient conduits. Pressure maps flickered with the rhythm of something vast, breathing beneath the frost. And then the voice returned. This time, it came not through the machine, but through the air itself. Mira could feel it humming through the walls, pulsing through the floor, vibrating gently in her fingertips. The station itself became a kind of tuning fork, resonating in harmony with the buried consciousness. "We dreamt of light," the voice said, "when the stars were still young." Mira closed her eyes and leaned back into her chair. And just like that, she was pulled into a dream, not her own this time, but Lumen's. She floated through its ancient atmosphere, a veil of purple clouds and golden lightning. The planet pulsed with life, vast, slow-moving forests of crystal, oceans that shimmered with bioluminescent rivers, and creatures that looked like floating mirrors, reflecting galaxies in their translucent skin. In this memory, she was one of them. She remembered walking the ice plains not in boots, but in graceful glides, light as stardust. She remembered building the cradle, not with tools, but with thought and harmony. A collective effort to preserve knowledge in the face of an oncoming darkness, a solar collapse, an ancient catastrophe that scattered their kind across the stars. And as that ancient version of her gazed up at the sky, she whispered, "Someday, someone will return. Someone will hear us again." Back in the station, Mira opened her eyes. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of connection. Of something ancient and vast recognizing something small and soft. She looked down at the translator. One final phrase blinked on its screen. Will you help us remember? Mira exhaled softly. Yes, she whispered. And miles below, the doors of the cradle unlocked. The memory architects. The cradle had opened. Far beneath the icy crust of lumen, its vast crystalline doors folded inward like the petals of a blooming flower, revealing a passage bathed in soft blue luminescence. The light shimmered across the walls as though alive, dancing gently with Mira's every movement. It was not artificial, this was bioluminescence, born from something ancient and intelligent, something that still remembered. Wrapped in her thermal suit and guided by her quiet excitement, Mira descended. Each step echoed softly into the hollow, echoing chamber, swallowed up by walls that pulsed with ancient energy. The corridor opened into a dome so massive that it felt like standing inside a hollowed-out star. Ribbons of glowing matter curled around spires of crystal and metal, structures that resembled both machines and music, as though they had been grown rather than built. And floating gently at the center of it all, were the architects. They were not alive in the way Mira was, nor were they truly dead. They were fragments, conscious echoes suspended in time, drifting within spheres of light. Dozens of them, each a memory, each a mind, preserved like glassy lanterns hung in the dark. As Mira stepped closer, one of the spheres blinked and descended, hovering just before her. A voice emerged, not spoken, but felt. Welcome, child of curiosity. The sphere's surface swirled with shapes and shadows, forming visions, glimpses of a civilization long gone. Towering beings made of starstone and breath. Cities that hovered in skies made of lavender dusk. Worlds they had traveled to. Dreams they had sculpted. And the last vision, a cataclysm. A chain of suns collapsing. A wave of darkness spreading. The architects had not fled, not all of them. Some had stayed behind to remember, to record, and to wait. We are the witnesses, the voice said gently. And now, so are you. The chamber around her responded. Lines of glowing script spiraled along the walls, languages Mira had never seen but instantly understood. Equations danced like fireflies. Star charts unrolled above her, mapping not just space, but time, a history of the universe written in lights and lullabies. Your kind is still young, another voice said, this one from a sphere high above. But you are ready. To remember, said a third. To learn, said a fourth. To carry our dreams into the next dawn, said them all, together. Mira felt her breath catch. For the first time in her life, she was no longer a solitary observer of the cosmos. She was part of its story, a bridge between what was and what could be. And just then, something shifted within her helmet. Her translator, long silent, flickered to life, not with static, but with song. The same melody from the stars, now clearer, now fuller, now hers. We are no longer alone, she whispered to herself. As she reached out to touch the memory sphere, it shimmered and folded inward, releasing a tiny object into her palm, a crystal, smooth and warm. Inside it glowed a miniature nebula, swirling softly. A gift, the architect's voice said. A spark of who we were, and what you may yet become. Mira held the crystal close to her chest, feeling its heartbeat match her own. Outside, the storm above the planet had cleared. The stars blinked through again, and somewhere in the depths of space, the universe listened. And dreamed. Echoes through the nebula. The moment Mira stepped out of the cradle, the light of lumen sky greeted her like an old friend, cool, pale, and vast. But something had changed. The stars above felt nearer, closer somehow, as if they had leaned down to listen while she was inside. In her hand, the memory crystal still pulsed softly. Each beat was a whisper from the architects, now resting silently, their legacy entrusted to her. Mira had always believed in the cold precision of science, the weight of data, the rigidity of numbers, but now, she felt something more, the poetry of discovery. She sat at the edge of a cliff overlooking the frozen valleys, opened her journal, and began to write. Not equations this time, but thoughts, dreams, translations of what she had felt. The architects didn't just chart the stars, she wrote. They listened to them. They recorded the dreams of worlds. And now their dreams live on, through me. Her breath clouded in the icy air as she looked to the horizon. A gentle aurora shimmered in the distance, a veil of soft green and violet light undulating across the sky like a sleeping giant's sigh. Suddenly, her suit's comms beeped. Base station, Dr. Mira. We're receiving something. You'll want to see this. With a flick of her wrist, Mira activated her visor. Streams of data began pouring in from the orbiting satellite they'd left behind. But this was not routine telemetry. The feed was alive with structures, codes layered in elegant spirals, much like the ones etched into the cradle's walls. It was a language. And it was coming. From beyond the Lumen system. Someone is answering, she whispered. She quickly returned to the lab dome, tucked between the icy cliffs. Screens lit up as she linked the satellite feed with her translator, feeding it the patterns she'd just received. Her fingers trembled as more symbols appeared. But these were new. Not from the architects. From someone else. The room filled with low, harmonic tones, a sound that was not music, not static, but something stranger. It made her bones vibrate gently, like standing beside a deep-running river. It was speech, encoded in waves. And somehow, it was beautiful. Echoes from a nebula, she murmured. The nebula in question appeared on screen, a soft, pinkish swirl in the nearby helix arm of the galaxy. A cloud of gas and light, that was singing. Her eyes widened. If the memory crystal had awakened something, perhaps it had signaled outward, sent a ripple across the void, like a pebble in a still pond. The architects were witnesses. But maybe others had heard. Others who were not extinct. In her journal, she added another line. The universe isn't just expanding. It's remembering. Responding. Dreaming back. For a long moment, Mira stood silently before the swirling image of the nebula. Then, with a steady breath, she activated the transmission array, aimed directly at the Helix Nebula, and spoke. We hear you. We remember. We dream too. And with that, she pressed send. The signal leapt skyward, through atmosphere, into space, onward toward the whispering nebula. And somewhere, beyond the light years, something waited. The language of stardust. The days on Lumen had no sunrises, just a long, soft twilight that never truly ended. And in that pale quiet, Mira waited. The signal she had sent toward the Helix Nebula was now racing through deep space, riding waves of light and silence. There would be no instant reply. But still, Mira couldn't help but feel the tension of expectation. As if something ancient had turned its gaze back toward her. Inside the lab dome, she began decoding more of the symbols left behind in the cradle. The architects hadn't just mapped stars, they had interacted with them. They had discovered that certain stars, especially those within young nebulae, pulsed with a rhythm not fully explained by physics. They called it the breath of light. A pulse in starlight that changes when it's listened to, Mira whispered aloud, reading their old script. It made no immediate sense, stars shouldn't know when they're being observed. But the data said otherwise. It was as if light itself remembered. That night, she played back the low harmonic tones received from the Helix Nebula. The sound was gentle, not quite musical, but richly textured, like sand shifting beneath waves, or leaves turning in wind. She fed the tones into a spectral synthesizer. What came out was unexpected. Images. Not clear pictures, but fractal shapes, golden spirals, branching veins, glowing lattices that danced like living things. Her translator rendered them as partial symbols, gestures of meaning rather than direct words. Emotions layered with physics. Beauty mixed with logic. It's not language like ours, she wrote in her journal. It's closer to music, or memory. Or dreams. As she worked late into the night, the aurora outside grew stronger, casting swirling light into the dome. Mira stood beneath the sky and let her thoughts drift. What if the nebula wasn't just responding, it was teaching? The harmonics began to align with known patterns from the cradle. The cradle hadn't been a tomb, it had been a classroom. A place of waiting. Waiting for someone like her. Suddenly, her comms buzzed again. "Mira," came the voice of Dr. Rian from base orbit. "You should see this. Our deep sky sensors just picked up a new pattern, moving toward us. It's slow, but deliberate. And it's changing course to intersect Lumen." Myra's heart paused. "Is it a comet?" "No," Rian said. "It's shaped. And it's singing the same frequencies as your nebula." For a moment, the world was still. Just the soft snow outside. The glowing sky. And the faint, steady breath of something distant drawing near. Something had heard. And now, it was coming. The visitor that carried silence. By the time the object entered Lumen's orbit, the twilight sky had shifted into deeper hues of violet and green. The snowglass meadows shimmered like frozen seas beneath the curtain of auroras. Mira stood on the observation platform, her breath a mist in the thin air. Above her, just past the curve of the horizon, the visitor had arrived, not a ship, not a comet, but something in between. It was quiet. It made no burns through the atmosphere, no thrusters, no trace of propulsion. And yet, it moved with intent. Estimated diameter, 1.3 kilometers. Hollow interior, Rian's voice echoed over the comm. "Material?" Mira asked softly. "Unknown. Not metal. Not ice. Something older." In the silent sky, the object pulsed with a dim inner glow, soft blue waves like the heartbeat of a sleeping moon. Back in the dome, Mira watched as her instruments synchronized with it. It wasn't transmitting data in a traditional sense, there were no beacons, no signals. But her equipment responded nonetheless. Frequencies aligned. Screens flickered with patterns. Her AI translator began to hum gently. It was like trying to understand a lullaby played backwards through wind chimes. She isolated one pulse. Slowed it. Transposed the tones into visuals. What appeared was not a message, but an impression, a memory. One not her own. It was a vision of vast halls filled with floating lights. Tall beings made of starlight and bone. They moved slowly, like dancers underwater. Above them, a sky of many suns. And at the center, a tree made entirely of crystal, its roots buried in dark matter, its leaves shimmering with nebula dust. "A civilization that dreams in light," Mira whispered. "A kind of consciousness carried not in bodies, but in geometry." She stood, eyes wide, heart still. Could memory be carried through architecture? Could intelligence exist in rhythm and pattern, passed not through speech, but through presence? Rian broke the silence again. "Mira, there's a hatch opening. On the underside of the object. It's beaming light toward your coordinates." Mira ran outside. A single pillar of soft, golden light stretched from the sky to the snowy field just beyond the dome. Not harsh. Not blinding. Like moonlight falling through cathedral windows. "You think it's inviting me?" she asked. Rian didn't answer. Mira stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. The air around the beam was warmer. It hummed like a voice she almost recognized. Then, she stepped into the light. And the world changed. She didn't move. Not physically. But the moment she entered the beam, her mind, her consciousness, was drawn forward, as though through a corridor made of stars. She floated. Saw memories not her own. Lifetimes of a people who had lived within the folds of galaxies. Who had built homes on the edges of black holes. Who had grown gardens of light and mapped emotions in constellations. They are not here anymore, came a voice, not in sound, but in feeling. But their dreams remain. Mira understood. The object wasn't a vessel, it was a seed. A drifting capsule of memory and meaning, sent to find kindred minds across time. And somehow, the song she had sent weeks ago had awakened it. And now it offered her everything it had. When she opened her eyes again, she was back on the snowy field. The light was gone. The object remained in the sky, silent, still. But inside her, something had changed. She now carried a map of a forgotten civilization. Not just data, but language, art, emotion, vision. And one message repeated like a soft echo through her mind. We remember. Teach them. Let us not be lost again. Mira looked up at the stars, the snow swirling gently around her, and felt the weight of her place in the vast, dreaming story of the universe. The visitor had spoken. And now, she would reply. The Observatory of Echoes. The night after the beam vanished, Mira could hardly sleep. Not from fear, there was no terror in what she had seen, but from awe. A sleepless kind of wonder that wrapped itself around her thoughts like velvet, soft and unshakable. Inside her now lived not only her own thoughts, but fragments, impressions, of another time. Another world. She spent hours sketching what she had seen. The crystalline tree that whispered feelings into light. The beings of geometry and shimmer. And above all, the shapes. Endless spirals, patterns that looped and bent like music made solid. In the control room, Rian adjusted the satellite dishes to track the orbiting visitor. Still holding position, he reported. Any signals? She asked. None. But, the instruments are different. They've changed. Indeed, when Mira looked closer, she found that the sensors she had calibrated so precisely were now behaving as if aware, responding to tones and movements that hadn't previously registered. It was as if the very tools of her trade had learned something from the encounter. She began a test. She placed a small quartz crystal under the spectrometer. Nothing unusual. Then, she softly hummed a pattern she had heard from the vision, for tones in descending rhythm. The moment she did, the screen blinked with color. Blue. Violet. Then a golden spiral. It's translating memory into resonance, she murmured. Our instruments aren't just measuring anymore. They're listening. That realization changed everything. She converted the entire southern wing of the observatory into what she called the Room of Echoes. There, she set up chambers with crystals, lenses, and tone generators. She played frequencies from the vision, recorded how the materials responded, then layered the results into maps. Within a week, a full map began to emerge, not of space, but of meaning. This isn't navigation, she told Rian. It's language. Every pattern, every shape, it's a way of speaking through physics. One night, as snow fell thick and soft outside the glass dome, Mira stood inside the Room of Echoes, bathed in soft blue light. A new spiral appeared on the main monitor, a living pulse. A wave that bent like breath across stars. She turned to Rian. I think they're still speaking. Not through messages, but through how we respond. He raised a brow. So it's not communication as we know it? No, she said. It's a dance. Outside, the visitor still hovered, patient and silent. But now, Mira didn't need it to speak. She had become its student. And soon, she knew, the language would complete itself, not with words, but with acts. For this was not a forgotten civilization. It was a dreaming one. And Mira, the sleep scientist, had just begun to dream with them. The Bridge of Silence. For the next 7 days, Mira rarely left the observatory. Not out of obligation, but from a sense of sacred purpose. The Room of Echoes had become more than a lab. It was her sanctuary. She worked in soft candlelight, playing harmonic tones through crystal prisms and polished copper coils. Each sound, each frequency, shaped the patterns differently, turning sound into light, light into geometry, and geometry into feeling. What startled her most was this. The shapes felt alive. When a tone resonated with one of the crystalline lattices she'd built, the structure would shift, subtly, but purposefully. Sometimes they vibrated in perfect rhythm. Sometimes they recoiled as if saying, "No." It was a conversation. "They're not just teaching us," Mira whispered. "They're waiting to learn." Meanwhile, Rian focused on the satellite feeds. And something new emerged. "Mira," he called one afternoon, the satellite caught something. On screen was the mysterious object still in orbit, what they now called the visitor. But instead of simply drifting as before, it was slowly spinning, revealing glyphs along its surface, luminescent carvings that pulsed in rhythm. "That's not an engine," Rian muttered. "It's a message board." Each glyph echoed one of the patterns Mira had already discovered. But there were new ones, too, ones she hadn't yet encountered. She printed the patterns out, pinning them across the walls of the observatory like a celestial puzzle. That night, unable to sleep, Mira sat beneath the glass dome and gazed at the stars. The sky seemed quieter than usual. The kind of stillness that came before revelation. Suddenly, the air around her grew heavy. The whispering returned, not in words, but in waves of emotion, like wind through tall grass. Mira stood slowly. Her breath stilled. The lights in the observatory dimmed. A soft hum filled the air. Then, in the center of the dome, light gathered, not from any source, but as if space itself folded inward, revealing a glowing circle just above the floor. She didn't move. She only listened. The circle pulsed. Not with noise. But with meaning. She understood. This was the Bridge of Silence. A place between stars and minds. A threshold not crossed by ships or machines, but by trust. Stillness. Wonder. Mira stepped toward the glowing ring. It shimmered, not dangerously, but gently, invitingly. She stood at its edge and closed her eyes. The moment she did, she saw everything. Planets like glowing coral reefs. Cities built into the spines of floating creatures. Suns that spoke in frequencies of gold. Civilizations long gone but never truly lost. They had left their knowledge behind, not in stone, but in resonance. And now, she was part of it. She opened her eyes, breathless. The glow faded. But the knowledge remained. "It's not just a language," she whispered. "It's a memory shared across the stars." The Bridge of Silence was gone. But its echo pulsed in her heartbeat. She knew what came next. She had to find the final tone. The forgotten tone. The one that could awaken the sleeping memories of 1,000 worlds, and remind the stars how to dream. The forgotten tone. By the next morning, the observatory felt different, alive, like the building itself had been stirred by the energy of the Bridge of Silence. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what Mira would uncover next. Rian found her standing in front of the projection wall, pinning up yet another map of harmonic glyphs. Her eyes were glowing, not with exhaustion, but with purpose. "You didn't sleep," he said gently. "I couldn't," Mira whispered. "Something's calling. I need to find the last tone." The glyphs were growing more complex. Some resembled constellations. Others looked like musical scales folded into impossible shapes. She had matched most of them to the visitor's carvings, but one symbol kept recurring, a simple spiral made of 3 overlapping waves. It didn't respond to any of their known tones. She tried infrared pulses, subsonic hums, even natural vibrations like water droplets or breath across glass. But nothing stirred. Maybe it's not just a sound, she murmured to herself. Maybe it's a feeling. That evening, Mira took the oldest tuning instrument they had, a hand-carved glass bowl from an ancient monastery, and carried it into the silent meadow behind the observatory. The stars were rising. The air was still. She placed the bowl on the ground, lit a single candle beside it, and closed her eyes. She didn't try to force anything. She just breathed. She thought of the first spark of curiosity she ever felt as a child, the one that made her take apart a clock to see how it sang time. She thought of her father's lullabies, how he said the stars weren't far, only quiet. She thought of every unanswered question she'd ever dared to love. And then she gently ran her fingers around the bowl. A tone rose. But this one didn't vibrate outward, it folded inward, like the space around her compressed in listening. The air shimmered. The grass leaned in. Even the candle flame tilted toward the sound, as if mesmerized. It was the forgotten tone. Somehow, she had played it. In the distance, the visitor pulsed once. Just once. But it was enough. Back inside, instruments blinked to life. The resonance chamber recorded frequencies not heard before. The glyph Mira couldn't solve rotated, then unlocked, its spiral unfurling into a long string of symbols that looked like coordinates. A map. A route. A destination. Rian rushed to her side. "What did you do?" "I remembered something that never belonged to me," Mira said softly. And it responded. "Do you think we're being invited?" She smiled faintly. "No. I think we're being remembered." That night, as they plotted the coordinates and prepared for what lay ahead, the observatory remained wrapped in a glowing hush. The tone still hummed softly in the corners. It was a lullaby for the stars. And the stars were beginning to sing back. Shall we continue with chapter 18, sister? The stars are awakening, one memory at a time. Milky Way sparkles. The telescope in the forest. The rain had just ended when Dr. Elara Miles stepped outside, her boots squelching softly into the mossy earth. Mist still hung in delicate threads among the tree trunks, catching the pale morning light like spun glass. She took a long breath of the cool air, filled with the scent of pine and wet stone, and turned her eyes to a structure that never failed to move her. Hidden deep in this ancient forest stood a telescope, unusual not for its size or age, but for its solitude. It had no dome, no concrete base, no observatory walls. Just a polished brass cylinder perched gently atop a tripod of carved wood, facing the canopy above like a sleeping creature dreaming of stars. No one knew who had built it. Elara had stumbled upon it 10 years ago while following a trail of old astronomy journals. They spoke of a forest scope that could read not just light, but memory, pulling images from the past, locked into the particles of starlight that had touched our world centuries ago. As night fell, she sat beside the scope once more. The lens shimmered slightly, fogged by breath or perhaps by something older, like the sigh of the universe itself. She turned the brass dials slowly, each click deep and hollow, like the ticking of a clock from another era. The telescope didn't show her galaxies or planets that night, it showed her a single room, flickering like candlelight. Shelves lined with ancient star maps. A hand, ghostly, tracing a constellation with a fingertip. It was a memory. Not hers. Not anyone's, really. A whisper left in the light. And as the forest hushed around her and the stars blinked through the parting mist, Elara closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. To what starlight remembered. The stars that remembered. The fire in Elara's small cabin crackled softly, casting long golden shadows across the wooden walls. The telescope in the forest still lingered in her thoughts, not just as a tool, but almost as a presence, a keeper of old secrets, listening to the skies. That night, as wind whispered through the trees like the hush of ancient voices, Elara returned once more to the clearing. The forest had shifted, branches bowed slightly overhead as if making space for her passage, and the mossy floor glowed faintly in the moonlight, silver-washed and silent. She approached the telescope slowly, her hands already familiar with the smooth dials and weathered brass. As she peered into the lens, a soft warmth brushed against her cheek, not from outside, but from within the eyepiece, as if the light it held was alive. This time, the stars did not show her memories of rooms or maps. They showed her themselves, great, swirling celestial bodies suspended in timeless stillness. One blinked, then another, like a signal across the void. They pulsed in quiet rhythm, a language too slow and ancient for speech. And then, Elara heard something. Not with her ears, but with her mind. A soft, steady voice made not of sound, but of pattern. A ripple of knowing. The stars remembered her. Or rather, they remembered all those like her, those who had looked up in silence, full of wonder, and asked no questions but listened anyway. The telescope, she realized, was never meant to see the future. It was built to remember. To preserve what the sky itself could not forget. She stepped back, hands trembling gently. The forest didn't move, but somehow it felt closer, more awake. Above, the stars twinkled as always, but now, she knew, they were not just lights. They were stories. And she was learning to read them. The language of light. The night deepened like velvet around Elara as she lingered near the telescope. The stars, so distant and ancient, shimmered above her with newfound meaning. Every blink, every slow pulse of brightness, felt less like chance and more like intention, as if the universe had always been speaking, but only now had she learned how to listen. She returned to the telescope's eyepiece, adjusting the focus gently until the stars resolved into sharp, crystalline points. Among them was one, slightly bluer than the rest, that pulsed in 3 short bursts, followed by a long one. Then again. Then again. Elara's breath caught. It was a pattern. Not in Morse code or anything invented by humans, but something simpler. A rhythm. The same way birds sing or trees whisper through the wind. This star, no, this message, wasn't meant to be translated. It was meant to be felt. She sat cross-legged in the moss, notebook open, scribbling the pulses into spiral shapes, mapping their sequence like ancient cave markings. She didn't know what they meant yet. But it didn't matter. She felt what they meant. Connection. Far off in space, a comet passed the star, its tail catching the starlight and scattering it into glittering arcs. And just for a second, the pulse changed. A new flicker. A gentle hush. A pause. The sky was waiting. And Elara, alone in her forest clearing, whispered back a simple word into the telescope's chamber. Yes. Somewhere far away, a particle of light began a journey. It would take years, decades, perhaps centuries, to reach its destination. But it was sent with care. With purpose. With hope. And that was enough. Elara leaned back in the moss, eyes closed, feeling the warmth of the telescope against her side like an old friend. She didn't know what would come next, but she didn't need to. The universe had whispered. And she had whispered back. The star map beneath her feet. The morning after the message pulsed through the telescope, Elara woke not to birdsong, but to silence. The kind of silence that holds its breath, filled with possibility. The forest around her stood perfectly still. The telescope, resting on its tripod like a sleeping guardian, gleamed in the dew-drenched light. Elara sat up slowly, her thoughts still wrapped in stardust and dreams. Something had shifted, not just in the sky, but in her. The message had done more than blink across the darkness, it had awakened something. She looked down at the moss beneath her, the spirals she'd drawn in the dirt with her fingers still etched like sacred symbols. But something strange was happening. Beneath the surface, faint lines were forming, delicate, silver threads weaving together like frost etchings on glass. A map. She knelt closer. It was as if the forest floor itself had absorbed the stars' rhythm. Each of her scribbled spirals now connected to another with thread-like veins of light, forming constellations, not above her this time, but below. The stars weren't just in the sky. They were here, in the ground, in the roots, in her. Elara reached out and pressed her hand gently to the earth. The moment her fingers touched the glowing lines, a warmth bloomed from her palm. Images, not in words, not even in pictures, but in feelings, rose through her: ancient wonder, deep time, the kindness of distant light, and the quiet patience of something far beyond human life, waiting, always waiting, for someone to notice. She heard a soft hum. Not from the telescope. Not from the forest. From beneath. From the roots of the world. It was the same pattern she'd heard in the sky, only slower, deeper, like the universe itself was humming along. Was this an echo from below? Or, a response? Her heart beat slowly, in time with the pulses. 3 short, 1 long. Yes, 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 we hear you. She whispered again. I'm here. And this time, the ground answered, not in words, but with a subtle pulse of light that rippled outward, drawing new lines in the forest floor. A growing map. A conversation, ancient and kind. As the morning sun filtered softly through the trees, Elara lay back in the moss once more, hands folded across her chest, the lines of starlight painting delicate paths beneath her. Somewhere between sky and soil, between telescope and tree, she had become part of something greater. The map was alive. And she was learning how to read it. The forest that could remember. The forest had always been a place of quiet, of mossy peace and soft winds whispering through pine needles. But now Elara sensed something deeper beneath the silence. A presence. A memory. She sat cross-legged beside the glowing map beneath her feet, where the faint starlit threads still pulsed with soft silver light. Her fingers trailed over them gently, tracing each delicate strand. It no longer felt like a random pattern, it felt familiar, as though she had seen this map before, somewhere beyond dreams. The telescope stood nearby, still turned skyward, but Elara was no longer only looking up. Something in the earth was calling too. She remembered the signal from the stars. The 3 short pulses, 1 long. A kind of invitation. But what if it hadn't just come from space? What if the forest had remembered it? She pressed both hands gently to the ground again. The moss was cool and damp beneath her fingers. Then, ever so faintly, she heard a low harmonic tone, not from her telescope, not from the sky, but from the trees themselves. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling. A vibration that moved through bark and leaf, whispering through ancient roots and winding into her bones. The trees, she realized, held memories. Long before humans walked beneath them. They had seen comets pass overhead, had felt the tug of the moon's gravity in their sap. They had grown beneath the music of stars. And perhaps, they had listened. She stood slowly and walked among the trunks, letting her hands brush the rough bark as if greeting old friends. The trees hummed softly in response. It was the same star rhythm again, only older, deeper, remembered. She found herself drawn to a clearing she had never seen before. At the center stood a single, enormous tree, its bark etched with faint glowing spirals, as if the forest itself had carved memories into its body. As she approached, the spirals lit up, softly, warmly, one after another, like memories awakening after centuries of sleep. And then, without knowing why, Elara spoke aloud. Who are you? There was no voice in reply. But the light shifted. The spirals on the tree's trunk expanded, forming a shape. Not words. A symbol. The same one her telescope had shown her on the first night of the signal. The same one now appearing in the forest floor map. A spiral within a spiral. The sign of return. The forest wasn't just remembering. It was responding. And she, Elara, was becoming something more than a scientist, more than an observer. She was becoming part of the memory itself. The memory spiral. The night deepened around Elara, and the stars above shimmered like curious eyes. The great spiral on the old tree pulsed gently, as if breathing in rhythm with the forest. Elara stood perfectly still, her eyes locked onto the soft light. It was hypnotic, ancient, comforting. And then, without warning, the spiral expanded, not physically, but inwardly, like a memory opening in her mind. She blinked once. And the forest was no longer the same. The trees around her shimmered, their leaves turned translucent, like pages in a living book. A mist rolled across the forest floor, glowing faintly with the same silver that lined her telescope's star map. She didn't feel afraid, only filled with a calm curiosity. The kind that only came when she was completely alone with the stars. As she took a step forward, the mist parted. And suddenly, she saw them. Figures, soft, glowing silhouettes, walking through the trees. Not ghosts. Not spirits. They were echoes. Memories imprinted into the forest itself. Men and women, children and elders, walking with strange tools and robes that shimmered like constellations. Their eyes were kind. Curious. Dreamy. They were not human. But they were scientists, like her. Elara crouched beside a stone in the clearing. The surface of the stone was covered in etchings, stars, spirals, comet paths. Some matched the drawings in her notebook exactly. Her breath caught. Had others seen these things before her? Had the forest been whispering to them too? The glowing echoes turned toward her now, as though they could see her. One of them, a tall figure with a face like moonlight, raised a hand and placed a finger to its lips. Shoo. And then, slowly, it pointed to the sky. The stars above shimmered and shifted, forming the same spiral once more, now larger than ever, reaching across constellations. Elara followed the gesture and turned her telescope toward the shape in the sky. But what she saw made her breath hitch in wonder. It wasn't just a pattern of stars. It was a map. A map not of Earth, but of somewhere beyond. A star system, drawn in starlight. Planets orbiting a central sun, a comet moving between them. The same comet she had traced for weeks. The same one that passed over her forest. A whisper touched her mind. Not a voice. A presence. You are part of this. Her knees went weak, but she didn't fall. Instead, she knelt in reverence, hands to the moss, forehead to the spiral-carved stone. The forest around her pulsed with memory and promise. For the first time in her life, she didn't just feel like a scientist. She felt like a messenger. A bridge between a whispering forest, a dreaming telescope, and a sky that remembered everything. The star code. The wind picked up softly as Elara stood, her fingertips still pressed against the cool moss of the spiral stone. The figures had vanished, fading like fog at sunrise, but their presence lingered, warm and watchful, like the hush before snowfall. Above her, the stars had not returned to their usual places. Instead, they remained frozen in the shape of that cosmic spiral, a celestial fingerprint carved across the sky. Her telescope, silent and still, almost seemed to hum with memory. Elara reached into her satchel and drew out her stargazer's journal. She flipped through the pages by lantern light until she reached the sketches she had drawn of the spiral. The shape matched exactly, but now, as she stared closer, something strange emerged. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a code. Each star, each small angle of light, represented something, a pulse, a direction, a number. Her scientific mind awakened, folding into the familiar thrill of a puzzle, while her heart fluttered with something more delicate, like or wrapped in silence. She laid on the moss beside the stone, telescope beside her, journal in hand, and began to decode. Hours passed unnoticed. The spiral translated into coordinates, impossibly far. Not just in space, but maybe in time. A planetary system no human telescope had ever reached. It was a place out of ancient dreams. And then she found something else. Beneath the coordinates, in patterns repeated across the star map, were musical notations. Elara blinked. Music? She held the journal closer, comparing the sequences against a small, weathered music sheet she always carried in her pocket. Her mother had once composed lullabies using starlight patterns, and Elara had learned the method as a child. The rhythm matched. The spiral was singing. Not in sound, but in sequence. A lullaby from the stars, encoded in mathematics, etched into memory, whispered through comet trails and carved into the bark of forest trees, knowing, without doubt, that it had once been real. Symbols poured onto the page, half music, half mathematics. Curved lines that resembled orbits, repeating sequences that matched ancient constellations. Sometimes, she wrote without even looking. Her hand seemed to know where the pen should go. Finally, when her fingers grew too tired to hold the pen, she stopped. The forest was still. The raven had not moved from its perch. And then, softly, quietly, there was a sound. Not from her telescope. Not from the sky. From the journal. Elara leaned closer. The paper shimmered faintly, glowing the way moss sometimes did after a storm. The spiral she had written was spinning slowly, not on the page, but beneath it, like something moving below glass. She gasped. The paper vibrated with tone, one note, low and clear, vibrating through her bones. The note was joined by another, then another, until the page sang in layered harmony, as though a choir of ancient voices had been waiting for this moment to speak. And they did speak. Not in words, but in memory. Suddenly, Elara wasn't in the forest anymore. She was floating, weightless, bodiless, in a place of quiet starlight. Surrounding her were transparent orbs filled with images, civilizations of light, ships that sailed without sails, forests on moons, oceans beneath the crusts of distant planets. A voice, calm and endless, echoed around her mind. You remembered. You listened. Elara tried to speak, but her voice had no sound in this place. The voice continued. The code was a key. The music, a memory. We were once many. Dreamers, seekers. But we forgot ourselves across time. The vision shifted. One orb burst into a million stars, showing fragments of something like Earth, but not quite. A civilization older than language. Beings who carved spiral stones, who sang to the night sky, who listened to comets like choirs. Elara felt tears on her cheeks. Somehow, she knew this place. Not in a way she could explain. But as one might remember the smell of their childhood home after decades away. You were one of us. Before the forgetting. Then, just as quickly, she was back in the forest. The journal sat open before her, no longer glowing. The raven was gone. A breeze stirred the leaves. She pressed her hand to the page. Still warm. Elara didn't know what she had just seen, if it had happened at all. But her chest ached with the sweetness of recognition. Not all knowledge comes from study. Some comes from listening. And she had listened well. The return of the spiral wind. The morning after the vision felt strange. Not just because of what Elara had seen, but because the world around her had changed in the smallest, most unnerving ways. The wind no longer rustled the leaves in a random shuffle. It moved in patterns, slow and circular, spiraling. Even the birdsong had altered, short sequences of rising notes, almost like a call and response. She heard them repeat the same 4 tones over and over, as if the forest itself was humming a memory. Elara stood at the edge of the clearing, the journal pressed to her chest. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. Instead, she felt aligned. As though her body and the stars had adjusted to the same rhythm. When she turned to the telescope, it greeted her like an old friend. Its mirror had frosted over during the night, but as she wiped it clean, she noticed something astonishing: the lens had etched faint markings. Tiny spirals. Concentric circles. Identical to the symbols she had drawn in her journal. As if the telescope, too, had seen. She adjusted the scope and turned it back to the star path where the whispering comet had passed. But the comet wasn't there anymore. Something else was. A dim shape, soft, glowing, and moving, was drifting along the same trajectory. It wasn't like any comet or asteroid Elara had ever seen. This was smoother. Organic. It pulsed faintly with each rotation, like a living signal, or a heartbeat in the sky. And then came the wind. The same spiraling gust that had first brought her to this place returned, rising through the trees like an ancient tide. It didn't push her, it wrapped around her, circling her body with a gentle pressure that almost felt like an embrace. Elara closed her eyes. The wind carried music again, fainter now, but layered with new chords, deeper, more resonant. The melody had evolved. It was no longer a call to remember. It was a message to prepare. Suddenly, the telescope began to vibrate. Elara stepped back as the entire frame shifted, slowly reorienting itself toward a different part of the sky, something it had never done before. It pointed not at the moving object, but at a cluster of stars just beyond it. A region of space so quiet, so seemingly ordinary, it had never drawn her attention before. And yet, there it was. A blinking light. Rhythmic. Intentional. A pattern she recognized from the ancient spiral memory: 4 long pulses, 3 short, 2 long, and 1 soft echo. It was the same sequence she had found etched into the stone that night under the telescope. The same pattern hidden in the comet's trail. And now, it was blinking back from a region of space that no satellite had ever mapped. She didn't need words to understand it. The message was clear. We are returning. Elara stepped away from the telescope, her heart beating with something both terrifying and beautiful. This wasn't a memory of something lost. This was the beginning of something found. The map beneath the mirror. The blinking light haunted Elara's thoughts all through the day. She had seen signals before: Morse code patterns, cosmic pulses from deep space quasars, even strange anomalies from broken satellites. But this was different. This wasn't noise or echo. This was language. The pattern, 4 long, 3 short, 2 long, 1 soft, felt intentional. Not just a broadcast. A message directed specifically at her. As dusk settled over the forest, Elara sat cross-legged beside the telescope, journal in hand, the wind playing with the edges of her coat. She sketched the sky again, each star, each curve of the spiral, and traced the blinking signal's origin. That quiet starless patch of sky. But tonight, something changed. As she stared at the empty region again through the telescope, a shimmer moved across the lens. Just a flicker, like heat above a road, but enough to make her lean closer. And then she saw it. Etched faintly onto the mirror inside the telescope, hidden beneath years of glass and polish, was something she'd never noticed before: a star map. Not a modern one. This was ancient, its symbols curved and delicate, its constellations unfamiliar. And at the very edge of this star map, a tiny spiral. The same shape the wind had made in the trees. The same mark she'd seen in the vision. Heart pounding, Elara carefully detached the mirror and brought it into the lantern light. Under the warm flicker, the etchings shimmered into visibility. Tiny dots, connected by lines, formed a constellation shaped like a bird with open wings. In the center, the spiral. She placed her finger over it, and felt it. The metal was warm. Before she could process what was happening, the wind swept through the clearing again, stronger now, with a high, whistling note. It circled around her in 3 tight loops, then stilled completely. The trees went silent. Then, a voice, not a sound, but a vibration inside her skull, spoke. "Follow the winged path." Elara gasped. And stumbled back, clutching the mirror. She looked up at the sky. The blinking signal had moved. Just slightly, just enough. It was no longer blinking at her. It was guiding her. Drawing a curve in the stars, like a trail to be followed, one point to the next, like stepping stones across the galaxy. The spiral wasn't just a shape. It was a map. And she was meant to walk it. She didn't know how, or when, or why, but something was unfolding. Something vast. Celestial. Alive. And somehow, impossibly, it knew her name. The path of the winged spiral. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No rustling leaves. No calling owls. Just the low hum of something unseen, thrumming like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Elara stood with the mirror cradled in her arms, heart racing. The etched spiral on the back glowed faintly now, as if pulsing in time with the stars above. She turned toward the sky, aligning her gaze with the blinking trail of the signal, the path that now arced slowly from the east to the northeast, just above the tree line. The stars shimmered like breadcrumbs. She knew what she had to do. One by one, she packed her tools, her star map, her notebook, the antique compass left by her grandfather, and the mirror itself, wrapped carefully in the cloth used to polish telescope lenses. Then, without even fully understanding why, she left the clearing behind and stepped into the woods. The trail was faint but unmistakable. Wherever the signal had passed, the forest had responded. Ferns curled toward it. Bark gleamed with dew that shimmered in starlight. Some leaves had turned silver on their edges, as if brushed by moonlight itself. She walked. And walked. For what felt like hours, but somehow, time bent around her, softening into a quiet drift. The farther she went, the more the forest began to change. Familiar pines gave way to tall, pale trees with narrow trunks and leaves shaped like tiny feathers. They whispered in a language just beyond hearing. And then, she saw it. A clearing. In the center, a perfect stone circle, covered in moss and stardust. 7 stones, equidistant, surrounding a pedestal. Upon the pedestal sat a second mirror, not glass, but polished obsidian, dark as space, smooth as still water. Elara stepped forward slowly. As she neared, the mirror on the pedestal began to hum. Her own telescope mirror, still wrapped in cloth, grew warm in her satchel. The two were calling to one another. Like puzzle pieces from 2 worlds trying to rejoin. She unwrapped her mirror and held it out. The 2 reflections, her own, and the one in the black stone, merged. And in that moment, she saw everything. Planets spinning. A distant red star pulsing like a heartbeat. A galaxy turning on its axis. And through it all, she saw the winged spiral, the path of stars, and in the center, a presence. Not human. Not entirely. But watching. Waiting. "Who are you?" she whispered aloud. No voice answered. But her telescope mirror lit up with a faint constellation, a bird in flight, its wings outstretched toward a small crescent moon. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a destination. The presence in the stars was leading her there. And Elara, the girl who once feared the silence of the sky, now felt herself drawn forward into its mystery. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was a seeker. And the stars had chosen her. The sky that remembered. The dawn never came. Elara awoke in the stone circle, unsure if she had slept or simply drifted into some kind of starlit trance. The trees above still shimmered silver, and though time must have passed, the sky remained a twilight blue, like the space between worlds. She rose slowly, the moss soft beneath her feet, and gazed at the black mirror still resting on the pedestal. It no longer hummed. But something had changed. Her own mirror, small, round, and now glowing faintly from within, was still warm to the touch. She turned it over and gasped. The back, once engraved with a simple spiral, now bore a constellation. It was a map, stars arranged in the shape of the winged bird she'd seen before, but now clearer, more detailed. Around its edges, markings in a script she didn't recognize, but felt she somehow understood. She traced one glowing symbol with her finger. The moment she did, the forest responded. The wind picked up gently. The leaves of the feather-shaped trees turned inward, like shutters, and then opened again, revealing a trail of light moving through the undergrowth. It wasn't a road or path, but rather a ribbon of stardust, leading deeper into the woods. The forest was remembering. Not her, perhaps, but something she now carried. Something ancient. As she walked, her notebook swung at her side, and her thoughts turned inward. Was this still Earth? Was this still science? Or had she crossed into some forgotten place where the stars themselves held memory? Her pace quickened as the path grew brighter, guiding her to a hill with a smooth stone surface at its peak. There, half buried under moss and thyme, lay a celestial map, carved into the stone itself. But it was upside down, the stars arranged not as they appeared from Earth, but from somewhere else. Somewhere far, far away. She sat down before it, heart fluttering, and opened her notebook. Page by page, she began sketching, aligning constellations, translating fragments of the symbols etched in both the stone and the mirror. One line stood out, repeating again and again around the spiral edge. When the earth forgets, the sky remembers. It hit her like a wave. These were not maps made by humans. They were not messages sent to us. They were messages left by us, long, long ago. Something ancient had once reached for the stars, and now, generations later, that echo had returned. She wasn't the first. The winged spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a trail of memory. A breadcrumb path through time and space, waiting for someone to awaken it. And she had. She, Elara, was now the last node in a chain of forgotten explorers. And the next step lay off the edge of the map. Somewhere the stars no longer shined. Somewhere the signal ended. And the silence began. The spiral that knew her name. The stone map lay beneath Elara's hands, its carvings glowing faintly now with a cool, internal light. The longer she looked, the more the symbols shimmered, shifting not in shape but in meaning, almost as though they were speaking directly to her. She whispered aloud, "It's not a map, it's a memory." And then, something stirred. From deep within the stone hill, a low tone vibrated into the air, a frequency more felt than heard. The trees rustled softly, not with wind, but with resonance. Her mirror vibrated against her palm, and when she held it up to the carved spiral, it began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, until it locked in place, perfectly aligned with the map. In that moment, Elara saw it. Not with her eyes, but with her mind. She stood suddenly within a towering observatory, made not of stone or glass, but of woven starlight and silence. Around her swirled images, people from ages past, watching the same skies. A civilization long lost, one that had risen with science and fallen into myth. They had seen it too. The spiral. The signal. And they had built this memory, not to preserve knowledge, but to plant it. The telescope wasn't just an instrument. It was a key. A key that opened the past. And Elara was the lock. A figure emerged in the vision, cloaked in light, features indistinct but presence unmistakable. They raised one hand and pointed skyward. Elara turned to follow the gesture. There, floating above the dream observatory, was a star system, unfamiliar yet achingly familiar. A binary star, a looping planet, and then, a glimmering blue moon, shaped like a sleeping spiral. There. That's where the story continues. Elara gasped. It wasn't just a signal she had received, it was a message to come home. Her notebook now filled with translated symbols, the path unfolding one word at a time. You have found the thread. Now follow it. She blinked, and the vision faded. The observatory was gone. But something had changed in the real world. Above her, where no star had twinkled before, now hung a single pale blue light, pulsing faintly in rhythm with her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. The spiral had remembered her. And now, it waited. The portal beneath the pines. The blue star still pulsed above the clearing, faint and steady like a celestial heartbeat. Elara stood beneath it, her breath misting in the forest air. Though the night was cool, a strange warmth surrounded her, as though the forest itself was cradling her gently, urging her forward. She opened the journal again. Since her vision in the dream observatory, the translated script had been revealing more each night. Tonight, it read. The thread becomes a bridge when belief becomes action. She stared at the words. A bridge. But to where? Suddenly, the air shimmered around the old telescope base. The metal of its frame glowed with the same soft light as the spiral stone map, and from its eyepiece, a line of energy extended, upward, outward, forming a thread of light that stretched through the trees and deep into the sky. She touched it. The moment her fingertips brushed the beam, time slowed. The forest fell silent. Gravity faded. And with a sound like a sigh and a song all at once, the ground beneath her shifted. A circle of soft white light opened below the telescope. Stones rearranged themselves, moss recoiled, and a staircase spiraled downward, carved into the very earth. The same spiral she had followed through dreams, etched now into reality. With trembling hands and a fierce, curious heart, Elara stepped down. Each step seemed to echo across centuries. Murals lined the walls, glowing images of scientists from all ages, alchemists, skywatchers, mathematicians, biologists, quantum physicists. All walking the spiral. All staring up at the stars. And at the center of it all. A room. Circular. Still. Silent. In the center, a pod. Sleek, silver, humming faintly. Next to it, a plaque. For the one who listens. This is not the end of the question. This is the beginning of the answer. Elara placed her hand on the pod. It opened. Inside, a chair, perfectly molded to fit her form. Controls of glass and light. Symbols she now understood as easily as breath. It was not just a vehicle. It was a vessel of memory, time, and exploration. And it was hers. She sat down. The pod sealed shut. And with the whisper of stars brushing her consciousness, the spiral began to move. Upward. Outward. Toward the blue star. Toward the place where dreams and science were no longer separate things. But one.